Former Starbucks chief executive Howard Schultz announced in a LinkedIn post that he and his wife are moving from Seattle to Florida after more than 4 decades in Washington, where he helped build the coffee chain into a global brand.
Today, Starbucks announced it will add thousands of jobs and invest millions in Tennessee. The big move brings bigger questions about what it means economically for Washington.
This is a state that has become the envy of many states.
Picture this. It is a Tuesday morning. You walk into your neighborhood Starbucks the same way you have for the last 20, maybe 30 years. Same green logo above the door. The same smell of fresh coffee hitting you before you even reach the counter. Same corner table where you have read the paper every single week for as long as you can remember. Now picture the man who built every single one of those stores. That smell, that green logo, that corner table. Picking up the phone and telling his lawyers to start drawing up paperwork for Miami, because as of right now, that is exactly what Howard Schultz is preparing to do, and he is taking $115 billion with him. Now here's what Seattle's mayor wants you to believe. She wants you to believe this is a personal decision, that Howard Schultz is simply relocating for lifestyle reasons, that taxes have nothing to do with it, that policy has nothing to do with it, that the way Seattle has been governed for the last decade has absolutely nothing to do with it. Here are the two numbers he will never put in the same sentence at a press conference. Washington state capital gains tax, 7%. Florida capital gains tax, 0. The mayor is not going to put those two numbers in the same sentence at a press conference. That is exactly why we are here. Before we go any further, I want to know what you think. Yes or no? Do you believe taxes drove Howard Schultz out of Seattle? Drop it in the comments right now. I read every single one. Hit subscribe. This is the channel that follows the money when nobody else will. To understand what Seattle is actually losing, you have to understand what Howard Schultz actually built. In 1987, Schultz bought a small Seattle coffee company with 6 locations. 6. He had a vision that most people in the industry told him was unrealistic. He believed Americans would pay a premium for a quality cup of coffee served in a place that felt like a neighborhood living room. Nobody believed him. The banks were skeptical. The investors were cautious. He built it anyway. Today, Starbucks operates across 86 countries. It employs over 350,000 people worldwide. It generates tens of billions of dollars in annual revenue. And every single piece of that empire was built in Seattle. From Seattle. Because of Seattle. For anyone over 60 watching this, Starbucks is not just a coffee chain. It is the company that changed what it meant to be an hourly worker in America. Howard Schultz gave part-time employees health insurance at a time when nobody in retail was doing that. He gave hourly workers stock options. He called his employees partners. That was not a marketing slogan. That was a business philosophy that put real money into the pockets of working people across this country for 4 decades. Starbucks did not just grow in Seattle. It transformed Seattle. It turned a rainy port city into a global brand. It put Seattle on the map in a way that nothing else had before. He did not just build a company, he built an economic identity for an entire city. And now that identity is doing the math on what it costs to stay.
Today, I talked to Spokane County Commissioner Josh Kearns on what this tax could mean for Spokane County. He says he's concerned the tax could discourage people from moving to Washington, especially with North Idaho just next door.
With us being right next door to Idaho, which has now a lower income tax, their gas is cheaper and their sales tax is cheaper. Quite frankly, this is going to make economic development more difficult for us here in Spokane County and all across Washington state.
Congressman Michael Baumgartner also raises concerns, saying the tax could hurt the state's long-term economic growth.
Some of the largest job creators in the state are going to leave the state because they don't want to pay the tax, and then there's going to be a lack of economic opportunity in the future.
Let's follow the money, because this is the part the mayor's office does not want trending on social media. Washington versus Florida. Let's put the numbers on the table. Washington state passed a capital gains tax of 7% on gains above $250,000. Now, 7% sounds modest when you say it out loud. It sounds like a reasonable ask. Until you understand what it means when the person writing that check is sitting on $115 billion in personal wealth. We are not talking about a few $1,000s a year. We are not talking about what you or I would call a tax bill. We are talking about a tax exposure on investment income that runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Every year, year after year, Florida collects 0% state income tax, 0 capital gains tax, 0. When you are Howard Schultz and you are sitting on $115 billion, that difference is not a lifestyle preference. That is not about sunshine or warm weather. That is the single largest financial decision a human being can make. And Howard Schultz did not build the largest coffeehouse empire on earth by making that kind of decision emotionally. He ran the numbers. The numbers told him to go south. But the capital gains tax is only part of the story. Seattle has spent the last decade layering cost upon cost onto the businesses and residents who chose to stay. In 2020, the city passed what critics immediately labeled the Amazon tax. It is a payroll tax that applies to every company in Seattle with a total payroll above $7 million. Every large employer in the city writes a check to Seattle city government based on how many people they employ and how much those people earn. The more jobs you create, the more you pay. Read that again. The more jobs you create in Seattle, the more Seattle charges you for creating them. On top of that, property crime in downtown Seattle surged through the early 2020s and has remained a persistent problem. Insurance premiums for businesses in the downtown corridor climbed sharply as a result. Starbucks itself closed multiple downtown Seattle locations, citing employee safety concerns and the cost of operating in an environment where theft and disorder had become routine business expenses. Starbucks was not alone. Target reduced its footprint in downtown Seattle. REI, a company founded in Seattle and deeply tied to the city's outdoor culture, relocated its headquarters out of the city entirely. These were not random decisions made by executives who suddenly disliked the Pacific Northwest. These were companies doing the same calculation Howard Schultz is doing right now. And here is what leaves with him. Howard Schultz's personal charitable foundation has invested tens of millions of dollars into Seattle communities over the course of his career. Job training programs, youth initiatives, community development. That giving does not follow a tax address automatically, but the center of gravity for his philanthropy moves with him. His investment decisions move with him. His business network moves with him. The deals he takes meetings on, the companies he backs, the entrepreneurs he advises, all of that economic activity now flows into the Florida economy instead of the Washington economy. And here is the part that should concern every business owner and every working family still in Seattle. Every wealthy entrepreneur watching this story right now in the city of Seattle is running the exact same calculation Howard Schultz is running. They are looking at their tax exposure. They are looking at their operating costs. They are looking at what Florida is offering versus what Seattle is charging. When the man who built the city's most iconic company decides the math no longer works, that is not a personal story. That is a signal. Now let's make this real. Not $115 billion real. Not capital gains tax real. Everyday real. Think about a woman named Carol. Carol is 67 years old. She spent 22 years as a shift supervisor at a Starbucks location in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. She started in her mid-40s after her kids were grown, looking for steady work with benefits. What she found was a company that gave hourly employees stock options at a time when that simply was not done in the service industry. In 1998, Carol used a portion of those stock gains to help with the down payment on her home. A home she still lives in today. A home she owns because a man in Seattle decided that the people making his coffee every morning deserved a stake in what they were building. Carol retired last year. She does not go back to Starbucks out of habit. She goes back every Tuesday morning because that place is hers. It is where she spent 2 decades of her working life. It is where she made the money that bought her house. When Howard Schultz leaves Seattle, Carol does not lose her Starbucks, but she loses something harder to name. The man who made her version of the American dream possible just did the math and decided the city that made him rich was no longer worth what it was charging him to stay. Now think about a man named Robert. Robert has run a small bakery in Seattle's First Hill neighborhood for 18 years. For 11 of those years, he supplied fresh pastries to 3 nearby Starbucks locations on a wholesale contract. It was not glamorous work. It was early mornings and tight margins, and the kind of steady, reliable revenue that lets a small business owner sleep at night. When Starbucks closed 2 of those downtown locations, citing safety and operating costs, Robert lost 40% of his wholesale revenue. Overnight, he did not receive a press conference. He did not receive a policy explanation. He received a contract termination notice and a deadline. He is still open, but he is running on thinner margins than he has seen in nearly 2 decades. And think about the young entrepreneur in South Lake Union. She has spent the last 3 years building a pitch to investors around Seattle's identity as a city that produces world-changing companies. Her slide deck opens with 3 names: Boeing, Amazon, Starbucks. 3 companies born in Seattle that reshaped entire industries. When the founder of the last name on that list decides the city is no longer worth staying in, that pitch gets harder to make. To every investor sitting across the table from her, to every partner considering a Seattle office, to anyone paying attention to where the people who build things are choosing to go. These are not statistics. These are the people who built their lives around the economic gravity that Howard Schultz created. And when that gravity shifts, it does not shift quietly. Here is what always happens after a story like this. And I want you to pay close attention because this pattern plays out the same way every single time. In every single city that goes down this road, the wealth leaves. The tax base shrinks. When the tax base shrinks, the city faces a budget shortfall. When the city faces a budget shortfall, the response from City Hall is always the same. They raise taxes on the businesses and residents who stayed, because those are the people still within reach, which makes staying more expensive, which causes more businesses and residents to leave, which shrinks the tax base further, which produces a larger shortfall, which produces another round of tax increases on the people who remain. That is not a political opinion. That is arithmetic. The math does not negotiate. The math does not respond to angry press conferences. The math does not care what the mayor believes about fairness or community or the obligations of wealthy residents. The math just keeps running, and it runs the same direction every single time. Now let's talk about that press conference, because the mayor's response to Howard Schultz preparing to leave was not a policy proposal. It was not a tax review commission. It was not a working group tasked with understanding why Seattle keeps losing its largest economic anchors. It was anger. Public anger directed at a private citizen who spent 35 years building the most recognized brand in the city's history, and who employed more Seattle residents than almost any other individual in the region's modern economic story. When your response to $115 billion preparing to walk out the door is to express outrage at the person holding it, you are not governing. You are performing. And the audience for that performance is not the businesses and residents watching their city become more expensive and more difficult every year. The audience is the political base that elected you and that responds to the language of grievance more readily than the language of solutions. The people paying the bill are never the politicians performing on that stage. Seattle is not alone in this. Not even close. San Francisco watched billions of dollars in tech wealth relocate to Austin and Miami over the last 5 years. Entire companies packed up and crossed state lines, not because they stopped loving the Bay Area, but because the math stopped working. Chicago just watched the Chicago Bears vote unanimously to leave Illinois for Indiana, after the state handed the franchise a projected $150 million annual property tax bill, and then adjourned for the summer without passing a solution. New York has lost more high-income residents than any other state in the country for 3 consecutive years. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. It is the same pattern playing out in city after city, state after state, wherever the cost of staying rises faster than the value of staying, and the pattern always ends the same way. The people with options leave, the people without options pay the bill. Seattle is not watching an isolated event. Seattle is watching the next chapter of a story that has already played out in San Francisco, in Chicago, in New York. And in every single case, the people who paid the price were not the ones who left. So here's the question I want you to sit with tonight. When a mayor publicly loses his temper at a man who spent 35 years building 350,000 jobs and putting his city's name on a global map, when his answer to $115 billion preparing to leave is anger instead of accountability, who exactly is governing that city? And who exactly is paying for the way it is being governed? I want to hear from you. Have you watched a major employer, a major brand, or a well-known name leave your city or your state in the last few years? Did your local government respond with real solutions or with press releases and press conferences? Tell me where you are and what you saw. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Stay informed, stay sharp, and never stop following the money.